There's a specific moment almost everyone remembers. You log into your savings account, you see the number, and for the first time, it starts with a 1 and has 5 digits behind it.
$10,000. You take a screenshot.
Maybe you text a friend, maybe you just sit there for a second, feeling something you haven't felt about money in a long time: relief. That feeling is real, and you earned it. But here's the part almost nobody tells you about that exact moment. For most people, $10,000 isn't a launch pad. It's where their progress quietly stalls out, sometimes for the next 3, 4, even 5 years. Maybe your version of this wasn't exactly 10,000. Maybe it was 5,000 or 25,000 or paying off a specific credit card balance down to 0. The exact figure isn't really the point. What matters is the shape of the moment: a clear number, a clean feeling of arrival, and a quiet, invisible loosening of the discipline that got you there in the first place. Not because they gave up, not because something went wrong, because that number does something to your brain that no one warns you about, and by the time you notice what's happening, years have already gone by. I'm going to walk you through exactly what that $10,000 moment does to people, why it happens to almost everyone the same way, and how to make sure it doesn't happen to you. If you've ever hit a savings goal and then quietly watched your progress flatten out afterward, this video is going to explain exactly why. Stick around, because the reveal here isn't a mistake you made. It's a trap built into how your brain processes round numbers. And if breakdowns like this are useful to you, subscribe. This channel exists to show you the real math and psychology behind money, not the guesswork. Let's start with what actually happens in the weeks right after someone crosses $10,000. For most of the journey up to that point, saving felt urgent. You had a reason. Maybe it was, I need an emergency fund, or I need a cushion in case something happens. Every dollar you added felt like it was closing a gap, moving you away from a vulnerable, unprotected version of your financial life. That urgency is what kept you disciplined. It's what made you say no to things. It's what made you automate transfers and actually stick to them. Then you cross $10,000 and something quietly shifts. The gap you were closing suddenly feels closed. The emergency fund goal you set for yourself, whatever it was, often lands somewhere close to that number. And once the goal is technically met, the nervous system treats it exactly like a finish line, even if you never consciously decided to stop. This is the part that matters. Nobody decides to stop saving aggressively at $10,000. It's almost never a deliberate choice. What happens instead is smaller and much harder to notice. The extra $100 a month you used to automatically move into savings starts feeling optional. You start telling yourself, I'll catch up next month when a new expense comes up. The dinner out that used to feel like it needed justification suddenly doesn't. None of these decisions feels like giving up. Each one feels reasonable in the moment. But add them up over 18 months, and the person who was saving $800 a month on the way to $10,000 is now saving $200 a month without ever consciously deciding to slow down. Here's a number that puts this in perspective. Financial behavior research consistently shows that savings rates drop significantly in the months immediately following a round number milestone. And for a meaningful share of people, that slower pace doesn't recover for years. Not because they can't save faster, because the psychological pressure that was driving the faster pace quietly disappeared the moment the number felt safe enough. Remember that finish line feeling from the beginning of this video? That's exactly the mechanism at work.
Your brain isn't built to distinguish between I hit an arbitrary round number and I'm actually financially secure. It treats both the same way. It relaxes. And relaxation when it comes to money almost always shows up as slightly smaller transfers, slightly more frequent splurges, and slightly less attention paid to the account that used to get checked every single day. This is where the trap really shows itself. $10,000 is genuinely a meaningful amount of money. It can cover a real emergency. It can absorb a job loss for a month or two, or a major car repair, or an unexpected medical bill.
So the relief you feel isn't irrational. The problem isn't that you feel relief. The problem is that $10,000 was never actually the destination. It was checkpoint 1. But because it's a clean, round, screenshot-worthy number, it gets treated like the finish line, when the real math behind long-term financial security requires you to keep the same intensity going for years past that point, not stop the moment it arrives. Let's talk about why this number specifically, and not some other amount, tends to trigger the stall. Round numbers carry a psychological weight that non-round numbers don't. $9,400 doesn't feel like an achievement the same way $10,000 does, even though the actual dollar difference between them is small.
Your brain rounds up, categorizes, and files 10,000 away as a real milestone, while 9,400 just feels like still saving. This is the same bias that makes a product priced at $9.99 feel meaningfully cheaper than $10, just flipped in the other direction. Round numbers feel like arrival points. Non-round numbers feel like progress. And once you've arrived somewhere, urgency naturally drops, even if arriving was never actually the goal. Now, let's look at what the other path looks like, because there is a completely different outcome available here, and it doesn't require some radical change in discipline. The people who don't stall at $10,000 almost always share one specific habit. Before they ever hit the milestone, they'd already decided what the next number will be.
Not vaguely, specifically. They knew that 10,000 was checkpoint 1, and that checkpoint 2, whether that was 25,000 or 3 months of expenses or some other concrete target, was already written down somewhere before the celebration even happened. That single detail changes everything about how the brain processes hitting the goal. Instead of registering destination reached, it registers checkpoint reached, next checkpoint identified. The emotional high still happens. The screenshot still gets taken. But the nervous system never fully exhales because there's already a next target sitting right there. This is genuinely the entire difference. It's not more willpower.
It's not a bigger income. It's the simple act of defining the next milestone before you reach the current one, so the moment of arrival never gets misread as an ending. Here's what that looks like in practice, and it's simpler than people expect. When your savings account is closing in on a round number, whatever that number happens to be for you, that's your cue to write down the next target immediately, before you get there. Not after you celebrate, but before. Because the celebration is exactly when the motivation to plan ahead is at its lowest, and exactly when the temptation to relax is at its highest.
It also helps to understand what typically comes after $10,000 if the goal was originally build an emergency fund. Once that fund is genuinely complete, usually somewhere between 3 and 6 months of essential expenses, the next milestone shifts in purpose entirely. It stops being about protection and starts being about growth. That might mean maxing out an employer 401k match if you haven't already, or opening an investment account for the first time, or setting a target for a house down payment. The specific number matters less than the fact that a number exists at all, sitting there, waiting before the previous one gets crossed off. Picture 2 people who both hit $10,000 in savings in the exact same month. Person 1 takes the screenshot, feels the relief, and genuinely believes the hard part is behind them.
There's no next number in their head, just a general sense of, I'll keep saving when I can. Person 2 takes the same screenshot, feels the same relief, but already has 25,000 written down somewhere as checkpoint 2, with a rough date attached to it. 18 months later, person 1 has maybe $12,000 because the pace slowed to whatever felt comfortable in the moment, month after month, without anyone deciding that on purpose. Person 2 has closer to 22,000, not because they were more disciplined in some abstract sense, but because they never permitted themselves to relax the pace since the target hadn't been reached yet. Same starting point, same amount of relief in that first moment, completely different trajectory over the following year and a half, and the only real difference between them was whether a next number existed before the first one arrived. This pattern doesn't just apply to that first $10,000 either. It shows up at every round number checkpoint people set for themselves if they don't catch it.
25,000 does it again. 50,000 does it again, often more intensely, because the emotional weight of a round number gets heavier as the number itself gets bigger. Even 6 figures does it, and honestly, that one might be the most common version of this trap, because by the time someone crosses $100,000, there's often a strong cultural sense that they've made it, even though, depending on their age, expenses, and goals, that number might represent a fraction of what they'll eventually need. The trap isn't unique to $10,000. 10,000 is just usually the first time most people experience it, which makes it the easiest version to recognize and correct early, before the pattern has a chance to repeat itself 3 or 4 more times over a lifetime. Recognizing it once, early, at the smallest and least costly version of the trap is what makes it possible to catch yourself the next 3 or 4 times it tries to happen, at checkpoints where the stakes and the dollar amounts involved are considerably higher.
There's also a quieter version of this trap that's worth naming, because it doesn't look like stalling at all from the outside. Some people don't slow their savings rate after hitting a milestone. Instead, they keep the same dollar amount going into savings every month, but they stop paying attention to where it's going. The money sits in a checking or basic savings account, earning next to nothing, instead of moving toward whatever the next real goal was supposed to be, whether that's an investment account, a higher yield account, or a specific purchase target. The number keeps growing, technically, so it doesn't feel like a problem, but growth without direction is its own kind of stall. It's not that progress stopped, it's that progress stopped meaning anything, because there was never a second target for it to move toward.
There's one more layer to this worth naming directly, because it's the part that keeps people stuck the longest. When the savings rate quietly drops after hitting $10,000, most people don't notice it happening. They still see the account balance slowly ticking upward, month after month, just more slowly than before. And a slowly rising number doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like progress, just at a gentler pace. That's what makes this trap so effective. It doesn't feel like stalling. It feels like relaxing after a stressful stretch, which is a completely reasonable thing to want. The issue is that relaxing for a month quietly turns into relaxing for 3 years without a single moment that feels like the decision to do that. One more thing worth mentioning, because people often ask this once they understand the pattern. This doesn't mean you're never allowed to slow down or enjoy hitting a goal. That would just trade one unhealthy relationship with money for another. The point isn't to treat every dollar as urgent forever. It's to make the slowdown a conscious choice instead of an invisible default. There's a real difference between deciding I've hit my emergency fund goal and I'm intentionally going to ease off for 2 months before ramping back up toward the next target, and simply drifting into a slower pace without ever noticing it happened. The first is a plan. The second is the trap. Both can look identical from the outside, the same account, the same slower monthly deposits, but only one of them comes with an end date and a next step already attached to it. So here's the milestone to actually take from this video, and it's a very specific action, not a vague resolution. If you're sitting close to a round number savings goal right now,
Whatever that number is for you, stop and write down the next one today before you get there. Put an actual number and an actual reason next to it. Not keep saving. A specific target and what it's for. That single step is the difference between a milestone that becomes a plateau and a milestone that becomes a checkpoint. If breakdowns like this, the psychology behind why financial progress quietly stalls even when nothing has gone wrong, are useful to you, subscribe. This channel exists to explain the real math and the real behavior behind money, not just the surface level advice. And if you've ever felt your own progress flatten out after hitting a goal you were proud of, drop a comment and tell me what number it happened at. I want to see how common this actually is.